He invited the wrong woman to the grandest gala of the year. By midnight, her words would silence a room full of millionaires. The Millionaire CEO brought the wrong nanny to the gala. Her speech left the room speechless. Welcome to Billionaire Stories Untold. If you enjoy deeply emotional stories of redemption and true love, please subscribe and hit the bell. Now, let us dive into the untold story that changed everything. Let us return to our main character. The ballroom at the Fairmont Grand shimmered under 1,000 crystal lights. Waiters moved like clockwork, silver trays glinting, the hum of conversation rising beneath a live string quartet. It was the kind of night where power wore tuxedos, and kindness rarely had a seat at the table. Inside that gleaming world, Alexander Reed adjusted his cufflinks, the weight of reputation heavy on his shoulders. Billionaire, founder of Reed Tech. Tonight's host of the Hearts and Horizons Gala, every camera waited for his entrance, every investor for his next move. But all Alexander cared about was making sure his 6-year-old son's foundation did not crumble under the recent PR storm. He needed warmth, humility, someone to soften his image. Across the city, Clara Bennett stood outside her small apartment, clutching an envelope that invited her to the same gala. She was told it was for community educators who helped underprivileged children. It felt like a miracle after months of fighting to keep her tiny preschool afloat. She pressed her thrift store dress, took one nervous breath, and whispered, "Maybe tonight changes something." When Alexander's driver stopped in front of her building, the confusion began. His assistant had texted the wrong Ms. Bennett. The actual nanny was miles away with the flu, but the message had gone to Clara, same last name, different world. The car door opened. Alexander barely looked up from his phone. "Ms. Bennett, you are ready?" Clara blinked, startled by the sight of him, the sharp suit, the calm command of someone used to control. Yes, of course," she managed, sliding into the car, heart pounding. Silence filled the ride downtown. Through the tinted window, the city glowed gold against the dusk. Clara tried not to fidget. Alexander spoke briefly into his earpiece, closing another $1 million deal before turning to her. "You have been with my son for how long?" She hesitated, unsure what to say. "Just long enough to know he has a kind heart." Something in her tone made him pause. He looked at her for the first time, really looked, and saw no trace of calculation, only sincerity. Maybe, he thought, authenticity could not be taught. Maybe it had to be found. When they arrived at the ballroom entrance, flashbulbs exploded. Cameras shouted his name. Alexander offered his arm with practiced grace. "Ready, Ms. Bennett." Clara forced a smile, her pulse racing. "As I will ever be." The moment they stepped into the gala, the contrast was stark, his world of diamonds and diplomacy against her modest dress and uncertain smile. A journalist whispered, "That must be his new nanny." Someone else laughed softly. Clara caught the murmur, cheeks burning, but kept her chin up. At their table, Alexander's business rival smirked. "Quite a choice for tonight, Reed. You are going for authenticity, I see." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Exactly," he replied, surprising even himself. The night unfolded in music and chatter, but one spark of destiny waited near the microphone. When the host announced, "Mr. Reed and his guest will now share a few words," Alexander turned to her, startled. "You do not have to." But Clara was already standing. Her hands trembled, yet her voice carried steady across the hall. "Sometimes," she said, "children do not need luxury. They need someone who looks at them and says, 'You matter.'" The string quartet went silent. The room of executives and investors stopped moving. For one suspended heartbeat, even Alexander forgot to breathe. Her voice, gentle, unpolished, honest, echoed through the ballroom like a truth long forgotten. And at that moment, the billionaire who had everything realized he had just met the one person who could change the way the world saw him and the way he saw himself. The next morning, sunlight crept through the tall windows of Alexander Reed's penthouse, touching the edge of a half-finished cup of coffee on the marble counter. He had not slept. The image of Clara standing beneath the chandelier, her trembling voice echoing across the ballroom, refused to leave his mind. Every news channel was replaying that moment. The internet called it the speech that stopped the gala. Alexander scrolled through headlines on his phone. Reed Tech CEO surprises with emotional new voice, and Who is the nanny who moved a room of millionaires to silence? He almost smiled at the irony. A woman who was never supposed to be there had turned his company's cold image into something human. Yet the truth gnawed at him. She was not a hired speaker or a professional socialite. She was a teacher who had accidentally ended up in his car. Across town, Clara poured cereal into a chipped bowl, watching the tiny TV on her kitchen counter. Her face flashed on the screen for a second, and she froze, spoon in midair. The host said, "That speech last night, from Alexander Reed's Nanny, captured hearts everywhere." Clara choked on her breath. Nanny? The word hit her like a slap. She had not lied. She had not meant to deceive anyone. But now, the entire city believed she was part of the billionaire's household. A knock came at her door. When she opened it, a man in a dark suit introduced himself as Reed Tech's driver. "Mr. Reed asked if you would join him for breakfast at the foundation office," he said politely. Clara hesitated. "I think there has been a mistake." The driver smiled gently. "Ma'am, he believes the same thing, but he still wants to. See you." 2 hours later, Clara found herself standing in front of the glass tower that bore Alexander's name. Her reflection looked small against the steel and sky. She pressed the elevator button, feeling out of place in her plain cardigan and sensible shoes. When the doors opened, Alexander was waiting in the lobby. No cameras, no audience, just him. "Ms. Bennett," he said quietly, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming." "I did not know I was coming to your gala," she began quickly, voice shaking. "Your assistant sent the message to the wrong person. I thought it was an event for teachers." Alexander nodded once. "I know. And somehow, your mistake saved my foundation." He gestured toward the window, where news vans were still parked below. Every donor who had pulled out last month just called to reinvest. Clara blinked. "Because of a speech I never planned to give. Because it was honest," he said simply. "And because people saw something real in a place built on performance." For the first time, she saw past his perfect composure. Beneath the crisp suit and the confident tone was a man who looked exhausted, almost lonely. "You do not have to thank me," she said softly. "But please, correct the misunderstanding. I am not your employee." "I will," Alexander promised, "but I was hoping you might become something else. The foundation needs someone to oversee the children's programs. You understand their world better than any of my executives ever could." Clara's eyes widened. "You want to hire me? I want to learn from you," he said, "if you will allow me." Silence filled the office, broken only by the sound of city traffic below. Clara studied his expression, sincere, unguarded, and something inside her shifted. For a brief moment, the gap between billionaire and teacher did not feel so wide. She nodded slowly. "I can stay for a trial week, but only if we do this for the children, not for your company's image." Alexander smiled faintly, the first true smile she had seen from him. "Agreed." As Clara left the office, a breeze caught the ends of her hair, sunlight glinting off the small silver necklace. She always wore a charm in the shape of a paper heart, a gift from one of her students. Alexander watched her go, unaware that the same necklace would soon become the symbol of everything he thought he had lost and everything he was about to find again. The week began quietly inside the Reed Foundation headquarters. What was meant to be a trial arrangement quickly turned into something more meaningful. Clara arrived every morning with a cup of black coffee and a notebook filled with sketches and lesson plans. She spoke to the staff with warmth, calling everyone by name, a small habit that unsettled Alexander's perfectly efficient world. The board members had expected a polished consultant. Instead, they got a woman who stayed late to reorganize the reading corner and used sticky notes to label toy bins for the children's program. Yet somehow, every meeting felt lighter when she was in the room. On Tuesday, Alexander stopped by the community center renovation site that the foundation funded. He found Clara kneeling on the floor with paint on her hands, laughing with 2 volunteers as they turned an empty space into a learning room. "You are supposed to be overseeing the project, not building it yourself," he said, half amused, half concerned. She glanced up, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Children can tell when something is made with care. If I expect them to learn here, it should look like a place worth believing in." Alexander watched her for a long moment. There was no calculation in her voice, no hint of self-promotion, just purpose. That night, When he looked at the preliminary budget, he saw her handwritten notes beside every figure, suggestions for cost saving, ideas for local sponsorship, even a doodle of a smiling child holding a paper heart. It made him laugh for the first time in months. By Thursday, the foundation's social media accounts were flooded with positive comments about the new outreach project. News outlets began referring to it as the Heart Room Initiative. The board demanded to know who came up with it. Alexander simply said, "Someone who reminded me what this was all about." Still, beneath the progress, tension simmered. One of his senior advisors, Victoria Lane, grew suspicious of Clara's sudden presence. "She is a school teacher, Alexander," Victoria said sharply during a private meeting. "Do you really believe this? Partnership will not backfire? The press still thinks she is your nanny." Alexander closed the file in front of him. "Then maybe it is time they stop thinking and start seeing." Victoria frowned. "You are risking your reputation for her." "No," he replied evenly. "I am restoring it." Meanwhile, Clara worked long hours without realizing how much her life was changing. Every evening, she left the office with paint on her fingers and hope in her eyes. One night, she returned home to find a small box at her doorstep. Inside was a handwritten note from Alexander, for the woman who reminded this company of its heart. "You once said, 'Children need to be seen,' so do you." Beneath the note lay a delicate silver pin shaped like a heart folded from paper. Clara traced it with her fingertips, moved in silence. No one had ever acknowledged her efforts like that before. The next morning, she pinned it to her cardigan and arrived early to work. Alexander noticed, but did not mention it. Instead, he offered her coffee and said, "I read your proposal about the mentorship program. It is excellent. We can launch it next quarter." Her smile was genuine. That would mean a lot to them. "To me as well," he said quietly. Outside, the city hummed with traffic, unaware that inside those glass walls, something extraordinary was unfolding. Not a romance built on glamour, but a slow rediscovery of empathy and trust. Later that day, Clara stood near the window, looking down at the street below. She saw a father walking with his child, both holding hands and laughing. For a moment, she wondered if Alexander ever got to do that with his son. The thought softened her heart even more. Behind her, Alexander's voice broke the silence. "Clara, the board wants us to present the new project together next week. Are you comfortable with that?" She turned, nodding. "As long as it is about the work, not the spotlight." He smiled slightly. "It will always be about the work." And as their reflections met in the glass, two worlds that once stood, oceans apart, began to move quietly, inevitably, toward each other. The day of the presentation arrived with clear skies over the city. The lobby of the Reed Foundation buzzed with reporters, donors, and staff. Clara stood in front of the elevator, holding her folder close to her chest, reminding herself to breathe. She had spent all night perfecting the slides for the Heart Room Initiative, determined to make it about the children, not herself. Alexander stepped out of his car and walked toward her with quiet confidence. He wore a dark navy suit, the same color as the night they first met, but his expression was softer now. "Ready to make history?" he asked. Clara smiled nervously. "I am just hoping the projector works," he laughed under his breath. "That makes two of us." Inside the conference hall, the lights dimmed as the presentation began. Clara spoke first, her voice steady but filled with warmth. She talked about classrooms without resources, about the power of small acts of belief. Each photo on the screen came from her time with the children drawings, tiny hands holding paper hearts. Laughter caught mid-frame. The audience leaned forward, drawn in by her sincerity. When she finished, Alexander stepped up beside her. He spoke not as a CEO but as a father, acknowledging how detached his company had become and how Clara's work reminded him of his late wife's dream to build a foundation rooted in empathy. The room went silent again, just as it had the night of the gala. When the lights came up, the applause was thunderous. Cameras flashed, questions poured in, and the story of the Heart Room spread even wider. But in that moment, all Clara saw was Alexander looking at her not as an employee, but as someone who had changed the rhythm of his world. That afternoon, the two of them stepped out into the courtyard behind the building. The city breeze played with Clara's hair. "You did well," Alexander said quietly. "You gave them something to believe in." Clara looked up at him. So did you. He hesitated, studying her face. You know, I used to think leadership meant control, but you proved it means trust. Her heart tightened at the sincerity in his voice. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. The caller ID read, Victoria Lane. He frowned and declined the call. Later that evening, when Clara returned home, she noticed a message on her answering machine. It was Victoria's voice, sharp and cold. Ms. Bennett, a word of advice, stay in your lane. The world may love your story now, but they will turn on you the moment they find out you are not who they think you are. Clara froze. She had forgotten that the public still believed she was Alexander's nanny. He had promised to clarify it, but with the attention surrounding the project, the lie had spread faster than the truth. Her stomach twisted with unease. The next morning, she arrived early to the office, determined to speak to Alexander about it. But before she could, she found him already waiting in the hallway, holding 2 cups of coffee. Morning, he said, offering her one. You look like you did not sleep. I did not, she admitted. There is something we need to fix. He nodded, his expression serious. I know. The press wants an interview tomorrow. They will ask about your role. I want to make it clear that you are not my employee, but my partner in the foundation. Her eyes softened. Thank you. I should have done it sooner, he said. I was protecting the company's narrative instead of your integrity. That will not happen again. For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled with mutual understanding. As the sun rose over the skyline, Alexander and Clara stood by the glass wall of the office, watching the city come alive. The line between professionalism and connection had blurred into something tender, something they both felt but neither dared to name. Clara broke the silence first. I am not used to people standing up for me. Then maybe you need to get used to it, he said softly. For the first time, she allowed herself to smile without hesitation. She looked down at the small silver pin he had given her and realized it no longer just symbolized gratitude. It had become a promise, a quiet one, but real. What neither of them knew was that beyond those bright headlines, someone else was preparing to use that same misunderstanding to tear them apart. By the end of the week, the Heart Room Initiative had become the most talked-about program in the city. Donors poured in, schools requested partnerships, and for the first time in years, the Reed Foundation felt alive again. Yet, behind the glossy headlines, tension began to build like a quiet storm. Alexander noticed it first. Meetings that used to run smoothly now carried whispers. Victoria Lane had grown unusually polite, which for her meant she was planning something. He had seen that look before the calm before betrayal. One Friday morning, he entered the boardroom to find the atmosphere stiff and rehearsed. Victoria stood near the projection screen, smiling too wide. Good morning, everyone, she began. Before we start, I would like to address a recent concern about the Heart Room Initiative. Clara, sitting beside Alexander, froze. The lights dimmed as Victoria clicked a remote. On the screen appeared a slideshow of news headlines and photographs. Clara at the gala, Clara at the foundation, Clara holding a child's hand at a school visit. Then, the final image. A magazine cover titled, The Billionaire and His Nanny, A Love Story for Profit. Gasps filled the room. Clara's face drained of color. Victoria folded her arms. Our investors deserve transparency. Is this woman truly qualified to represent the foundation? Or has our CEO been hiding a personal affair behind a charity? Alexander's voice was calm but cold. Enough, Victoria. But Victoria pressed on. The board will not tolerate deception. Either you clarify this relationship publicly, or we risk losing the trust of every partner we have left. Clara felt the room spinning. She stood abruptly. I never asked for any of this. I was invited by mistake, and I have done nothing but work for those children. If that is not enough, then I will step away. Alexander turned to her sharply. No, you will not. His tone silenced the room. He faced the board, his jaw set. This woman saved our foundation. She brought integrity where there was none. If you cannot see that, then perhaps I have been running the wrong company. The room went quiet. Victoria's smile faltered. Without another word, Alexander walked out, and Clara followed. In the hallway, the weight of humiliation finally broke through her composure. Alexander, they will never let this go. I cannot be the reason your company falls apart. He looked at her, the mask of control slipping from his face. You are not the reason, Clara. You are the reason it still stands. Tears stung her eyes. This is your world. They will turn this into gossip, and they will drag both of us through it. He reached for her hand but stopped halfway, unsure if he had the right. Then let them talk. I am done building walls to keep the truth out. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The elevator bell chimed softly in the distance. Later that night, Clara sat alone in her apartment, the city lights flickering against the window. Her phone buzzed with messages from reporters, all asking the same question. Are you Alexander Reed's nanny or his partner? She turned it off and buried her face in her hands. She thought about the children, the foundation, everything they had built. Her heart ached with the fear that all their progress would be erased by rumors. Then her eyes fell on the silver heart pin on her dresser. She picked it up, tracing its edges, remembering his words. You once said children need to be seen. So do you. The next morning, Clara returned to the office, ready to resign. But before she could step through the doors, she saw Alexander standing in the lobby, surrounded by reporters. Cameras flashed as he spoke clearly, his voice steady and unflinching. Last night my colleague and I were accused of deceit, he said. But the truth is simple. The woman you call a nanny is the architect of the Heart Room Initiative. She is not my employee. She is my partner in this mission, and without her, none of this would exist. The crowd erupted in questions, but Alexander ignored them. He looked toward the glass doors where Clara stood frozen, eyes wide. For the first time, he did not look like a CEO managing a crisis. He looked like a man finally choosing honesty over reputation. And in that single moment, Clara understood something profound. What began as a mistake had become the most honest chapter of both their lives. The air inside the Reed Foundation building was heavy the morning after Alexander's public statement. Overnight, social media had exploded with clips of his declaration. Some called it brave, others called it reckless. For Clara, it was overwhelming. She sat at her desk, scrolling through hundreds of messages from strangers, teachers, parents, volunteers, all thanking her for standing up for what mattered. Yet every word of praise only made her heart ache more. She never wanted to become a headline. When Alexander arrived, the office grew quiet. He walked toward her, ignoring the stares that followed. I am sorry you had to go through this, he said gently, but I do not regret telling the truth. Clara looked up at him, eyes tired but kind. You should not have to risk everything for me. I did not do it for you, he said, voice steady. I did it because pretending was destroying both of us. For a moment, she did not speak. There was something different about him now. The armor of success he always wore seemed to have cracked, revealing a man who finally understood what integrity meant. Later that afternoon, the board called an emergency meeting. Alexander insisted that Clara attend. As they stepped into the room, every executive turned to watch them. Victoria Lane sat at the far end of the table, her expression unreadable. Alexander began without waiting for permission. The foundation has made mistakes, mine most of all. But what happened this week reminded me that charity without honesty is just another form of business. From this day forward, the Heart Room Initiative will operate as an independent nonprofit, led by Ms. Bennett. The room erupted in surprise. Clara's breath caught. Alexander, you cannot just— Yes, I can, he said firmly. It is time the foundation belonged to the people it serves. Victoria slammed her pen on the table. You are giving away control. That project brought in millions of dollars in publicity. You cannot just hand it to her. Alexander met her glare. Watch me. For the first time, Victoria had no words. The rest of the board remained silent, realizing the decision had already been made. After the meeting, Clara followed him out into the hallway. You just gave away your most successful project, she said softly. Why? He turned to her, his eyes calm. Because you taught me that success without soul means nothing. I built an empire but forgot what it was for. Maybe this is how I make it right. Clara felt her throat tighten. I do not know what to say. You do not have to, he replied. Just promise me, you will keep building it your way. As the sun set over the city, they walked out of the building together. The noise of reporters had faded. For once, there was peace. Alexander paused by the street corner where his car waited. You once told me that every child needs someone to believe in them. I think I needed that too. She smiled faintly. Then I hope you never stop believing in yourself, Mr. Reed. He laughed softly. Alexander, he corrected. Just Alexander. They stood there for a moment that felt suspended between two worlds, their old one built on appearances and the new one built on truth. A soft wind lifted the edges of Clara's hair, and he wanted to reach out, but he stopped himself. There would be a time for that, but not today. Instead, he said, "Take the weekend off. You have earned it." She nodded, clutching her bag. "And you should rest. You look like a man who has finally done the right thing and realized it is exhausting." He smiled, watching her walk away, her silver heart pin catching the light. It gleamed like a quiet promise that their story was far from over. As he turned toward his car, Alexander did not know that a single document was already circulating through the media, a leaked report about the gala night. It claimed the wrong Nanny story was staged from the beginning. Someone wanted revenge, and the next chapter of their lives was about to take a darker turn. The deepest secrets are about to change everything. Subscribe now to catch the dramatic twist that is coming in the next chapter. The storm arrived quietly at first, through whispers and rumors that spread faster than truth. By Monday morning, the headlines screamed accusations. The Heartroom scandal, was it all a publicity stunt? Photos from the gala resurfaced, twisted with false captions and doctored timelines. The story claimed that Alexander Reed had orchestrated everything: the wrong invitation, the viral speech, even Clara's mistaken identity as a calculated move to repair his company's image. Inside the foundation, staff whispered in hallways, afraid to meet Clara's eyes. She walked past them with her chin high, but her stomach churned. Every glance felt like judgment, every silence like betrayal. When she reached Alexander's office, he was already waiting, a newspaper folded in his hands. His jaw was tight, his eyes darker than usual. "They say we planned the whole thing," he said quietly. "They have fabricated evidence, emails, dates, even fake transcripts." Clara's voice broke slightly. "People will believe what they want to believe. They will believe what they are told," Alexander replied, "and someone is making sure they hear only lies." He tossed the newspaper onto his desk. "It came from inside the company. Victoria must have leaked it." Clara's breath caught. "But why? You already gave her everything she wanted." "No," he said bitterly. "I gave her the one thing she hates: proof that money is not power." That evening, Clara found herself standing outside the foundation building long after everyone else had gone home. Reporters still lingered near the street, shouting her name, asking if she would confirm the fabricated romance. She turned away, heart pounding. Alexander appeared beside her, his coat draped over one arm. "Come with me," he said. "We need to get out of the noise." They drove through the city in silence, until he stopped at a small park overlooking the skyline. The same park his late wife once loved. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter from a nearby playground. Clara looked out at the glittering lights below. "This could destroy everything," she whispered. Alexander's voice was quiet but firm. "Then we start over. Again. But this time, we do not hide." She turned to him. "You would risk your name for this?" "For truth," he said. "And for you." The words hung between them, fragile yet undeniable. The distance that had kept them apart finally felt smaller, not because the world believed in them, but because they finally believed in each other. And as the night wind swept around them, Clara realized that no lie, no scandal, no betrayal could undo what had already been written in both their hearts. The following morning, the city woke to a new wave of chaos. Every television channel replayed the so-called exclusive documents about the Heartroom initiative. A fake email with Alexander's signature circulated online, claiming he had hired an actress to pose as a nanny. Investors began to panic. The foundation's donations froze overnight. Inside the office, Alexander faced a wall of cameras and reporters demanding answers. Clara stood behind him, her pulse racing. "You do not have to do this," she whispered. "Yes, I do," he said. "They want a confession. I will give them the truth." When the press conference began, the room fell into tense silence. Alexander looked directly into the cameras. "I will not deny that a mistake brought Clara Bennett into my life. But what happened after that mistake changed everything. We did not fake compassion, and we did not build this foundation on a lie. Every cent, every project, Every smile of a child you have seen, it is real. You want proof? Come to the heart room and see it yourself. Reporters shouted questions. Flashes blinded the air, but Alexander kept his gaze steady. When it ended, he turned toward Clara, his voice low. The truth will stand longer than their noise. Still, by afternoon, the backlash worsened. Anonymous messages threatened to sue, sponsors withdrew, and the foundation's accounts were temporarily frozen pending investigation. Clara sat in her small office, staring at the empty balance sheet. Her hands trembled. Victoria Lane appeared at the doorway, her tone cold. I warned you this would happen. You should have stayed in your lane, Ms. Bennett. Clara rose slowly, her voice calm but unyielding. And you should have remembered that integrity always outlives fear. Victoria's smile vanished. She turned sharply and walked away. That night, Alexander called Clara to the rooftop of the Foundation's headquarters. The city lights stretched endlessly below them, a glowing reminder of everything they had built and might now lose. Tomorrow, the board will vote to remove me, he said quietly, but they cannot take what matters most. Clara looked at him, the wind pulling gently at her hair. You mean your company? He shook his head. No, I mean you. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to still. The man who once measured life in contracts and numbers now spoke with nothing but sincerity. She felt tears rise but refused to let them fall. If this ends tomorrow, I want you to know I would make the same mistake again. He smiled, a rare and genuine smile that reached his eyes. So would I. The wind carried their words into the night, as if sealing an unspoken promise. Beneath the glow of the city, their battle was far from over. But something had shifted. The fight was no longer about reputation or wealth, it was about truth, redemption, and a love born from the most unexpected of mistakes. The board meeting the next morning was the quietest in the company's history. Rain streaked across the glass walls as Alexander Reed stood before the directors, his posture calm, his decision already made. You do not have to vote, he said firmly. I am stepping down. The foundation deserves freedom from my name if it is going to survive. Murmurs filled the room. Some of the board members looked stunned, others relieved. Victoria Lane, sitting in the corner, forced a thin smile, believing she had finally won. But Alexander continued, his tone unwavering. Before I leave, I want to make one thing clear. The Heart Room initiative is not built on me. It was born from the kindness of a woman who reminded this company that empathy is not a weakness. At that moment, the glass doors opened. Clara stepped in, holding a small stack of papers. Her face was pale but resolute. Before you make your decision, she said, you should see this. She handed the documents to the chairman. They were records of transactions and emails showing that Victoria had paid a private media firm to leak and manipulate the story. The room fell silent. The chairman turned to Victoria. Is this true? Victoria's voice trembled. You cannot prove. Alexander cut in, his eyes sharp. You already did. Security escorted Victoria out as the board whispered in disbelief. Clara turned toward Alexander, unsure of what came next. He simply exhaled, the weight of months finally lifting from his chest. Later that week, the Heart Room reopened under Clara's leadership. The city gathered for the new beginning, not to see wealth or scandal, but to see hope rebuilt. The children's laughter filled the halls again, the paper hearts hanging from the ceiling as a symbol of resilience. Alexander arrived quietly at the ceremony. He wore no suit, no entourage, just a small box in his hand. When Clara saw him, she smiled gently. I thought you were leaving the city. I was, he said. But I realized something. Leaving would not be redemption, it would be escape. He opened the box, revealing the same silver pin, shaped like a folded heart. This time, it was engraved with the words, New Deal of Trust. Clara's eyes filled with emotion. What is this? He took a step closer. It is a promise. No contracts, no lies, just faith. Will you build this future with me? For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she nodded, tears catching the light. Yes, but this time let us build it together. As they walked into the Heart Room, surrounded by the laughter of children, the city outside felt brighter. The scandal was gone, the headlines forgotten, but what remained was stronger than any empire, two people who had found truth in their greatest mistake. Thank you for joining us for this cinematic adventure. If you want more untold stories of billionaire love and redemption, please subscribe and choose your next true heart journey on your screen now.